The Pacifist Crusade is a sin-focused campaign to systematically eliminate profanity in all of its forms, in pursuit of the fulfillment of godly perfection. This project will be deemed unrealistic by the vast majority of persons, assuming any think it is possible. It is not unreasonable to believe that no one will entertain the likelihood of this endeavor being anything but the idealistic fantasy of a Christian extremist. However, there are 2 points to be said about this reaction. It questions the power of God. Even if we admit such a project is impossible for us, we must remember that with God, all things are possible. We also need to remember that we are called out to perfection. The world is in sin and has no way out, but we are called out, we are a people set apart, we are a peculiar people, a chosen generation. But ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, an holy nation, a peculiar people. That ye should shew forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. 1 Peter 2 verse 9. This is not a personal nor subjective process. It is a campaign that takes place within the structure of an ecclesiastical church, a church whereas we are all priests, we are all servants of the church and therefore governing officials. In the church we are all equals. Yet we are to hold one another accountable. The question then becomes one of asking what equality is, because most people assume it is a subjective sense of worth or perhaps the way we are treated by the legal establishment. We are told justice is blind because it deals only with the chargeable offense and is blind to everything else. However, this is oxymoronic because equality before the law implies it is the law that determines good and evil. But we know what is legal is not always what is right. The law can justify many things we do not normally think ought to be justified. Needless to say, equality before the law is different from equality in the eyes of God. How can we all be different yet equal? If the state reflects a particular constituency and political position, how are we equal under the law, when the law reflects the position of the party in power? I suppose it would be right to say that Nazis and Jews were equal before the law in Germany. The courts only looked at the charge of being Jewish and not at any other aspect of the person. The law forbids the rich and poor from sleeping under bridges. No matter if one is a billionaire or a single mother struggling to feed her 3 kids, the guilty person will still be fined the same amount for littering the streets. The equality we have is largely subjective or, if you prefer, imaginary. Equality is more about the narrative than something we can actually confirm. Can we have peace if our equality is subjective? Are we not all likely to feel discriminated against, to some degree? Can we expect everyone to have their own peace and sense of equality, like people have their own truth, according to some? Pacifism is not peace, as it is based on terror or fear of conflict. Pacifism is a desire for peace but with preparedness for war. Peace cannot be based on tolerance for evil. We cannot have peace until we can wage war successfully. Peace is the abolishment of evil, that is, that which disturbs the peace. There is a cost of peace. To surrender to evil is a cost of peace, but it is a false peace. But where is the line between peace and the profane? Where is the line between peace and a surrender to evil? Evil would like us to believe that the only way to peace is through a surrender to evil, that as long as we fight evil, there will never be any peace. Over time we become more tolerant of evil, we become more accommodating. We let things slide in our own life and in what we expect of others. Manners are lost, and expectations are lowered. We do not want to fight and so we permit excuses for bad behavior to go unchallenged. We want peace and so we try and pacify evil. But the only peace that evil knows is death, for evil has a mission and to fulfill it everything must die. Unfortunately, many people have a nihilistic view of peace. These people think that an absolute passive state is peace. When the car runs out of gas, that is peace. When people stop wanting things, that is peace. Peace is not stagnation nor apathy, it is the absence of conflict, which is the elimination of liabilities or competing claims against the same resource. The corollary of peace is a free market. A proxy of war is government. The state has no purpose or function beyond that of causing controlled conflict. The state must identify a want and a designated donor. The state by definition, does nothing but create and perpetuate liabilities, that is competing claims to the same asset. Therefore, the state is an agent of war, conflict and division. The state is the very epitome of evil. We can measure evil and threats to peace by measuring how much value is transferred from A to B by the state or through other means of expropriation, e.g. crime. The problem we have had as a society is that we equate the absence of conflict as peace. Because of this, the authorities often focus on reducing the chance of conflict or the incidence of conflicts, to create peace. This can mean downgrading felonies to misdemeanors, encouraging the non-reporting of crimes and victim blaming to turn a felony into an incident with no legal consequences. Unfortunately, those who desire peace will often go along with these kinds of policies under the guise of wanting peace. But peace cannot be acquired by pacifying evil. To be a pacifist and to work for peace requires a line be drawn. There is nothing worse than seeking peace without knowing the point at which war will be declared. Peace cannot be achieved by a perpetual retreat. At some point the only place we have left to go is death. The pacifist response to profanity is two-phased. Pacifism is not passivity. Faced with injustice, the pacifist draws a line. However, the pacifist is never the one to cross it. What has tampered many pacifists is that they are uncertain where to draw the line, and being dogmatic about what is unacceptable, appears to betray the principles of pacifism. Pacifists often give in to arguments because they think compromise is the solution to a contested position. There are many things that make sense when dealing with a pacifist that is nothing short of suicidal when dealing with evil. But of course, many pacifists do not wish to make this assumption, that people might be evil, because it appears to operate contrary to their desire for peace. How is peace possible if faced with the reality that many persons are not good actors and are in fact, evil? It might be good to realize, however, is that if we do not accept the reality of evil, we may well find ourselves trying to negotiate a solution to someone who just wants us dead. The unfortunate truth is that the person who wishes to live in peace is at a severe disadvantage if negotiating with a person who is willing to die too in the pursuit of some end. If you want peace and the other person wants to do something which you feel is wrong, you are likely to capitulate to their demands if you desire peace enough, especially if you believe there will never be peace until the other person gets their own way. This is negotiating with a 5-year-old about what time is bedtime. If you cannot handle the drama, the child will stay up every night until they fall asleep from exhaustion. Without a clear line of demarcation, what is to stop the pacifist from backing up over and over again until we find our backs to a cliff? When do we call the bluff of an opponent? When must we sacrifice peace for some higher end, and what is that end that outweighs peace? The truth is, we ought never to sacrifice equality for peace, for there is no peace in a relationship where there is a power disparity. If we allow ourselves to be enslaved for peace, there is no peace, for it emboldens the aggressor to maintain pressure. There is only equality or oppression, and if there is oppression there is no peace. Pacifists need to recognize, they are not the cause of war. Pacifists do not initiate attacks on other individuals or groups. We do not need policies that will guide us away from committing unilateral acts of violence. Because we do not strive for or want to be dominant, and because accepting situations in which we are oppressed will only perpetuate the likelihood of war or further oppression, the condition we need to seek to obtain is equality. But what is equality? Because many wars are started on the pretext of righting some wrong or achieving some balance. There is only one workable form of equality, and that is the value of time. Time for time means my time is as valuable as your time. However, this concept of justice requires further refinement. There needs to be a broader sense of justice than found in a transaction between two parties. The transaction itself could be geared towards an unjust purpose, even if the transaction itself is equal in its exchange. This brings us back to the principle of peace, as a first-order principle. Equality seems to qualify or legitimize our attempts at peace, but in fact, even if the actions do enhance equality, peace is a far broader and more comprehensive concept. Our behavior must then improve the level or chance at peace in the world. We cannot compromise equality for peace, but that is because inequality will only precipitate further aggressive activities, not because equality is a higher good than peace. Our choices must therefore always be directed towards peace in the absolute and categorical sense. Peace is the ultimate first-order principle and cannot be qualified by any other factor.